The galaxy had seen better days. War had spread across countless systems, leaving destruction and despair in its wake. Human forces, ever fighting for survival, were entrenched in battle after battle, but they had never encountered an enemy like Queen Eris. Captain Ethan Moore was one of the best soldiers in the human fleet. He had seen countless conflicts, fought in battles that would leave most men broken. Yet nothing could prepare him for the mission he was about to face. The order came from Command Rescue, a group of diplomats who had been caught behind enemy lines. The enemy, the Zerothians, led by the fierce and cold Queen Eris, had trapped them in a rebel city. The Zerothian forces were known for their ruthlessness, and Queen Eris, their leader, was said to be more monster than ruler. A woman of incredible power and unwavering control. She had built a reputation as a warrior who showed no mercy. Stories about her spread across the galaxy, how she crushed her enemies without hesitation, and how her people feared her more than the battles they fought. But Ethan had no choice. His mission was clear: get in, rescue the diplomats, and get out. With a team of 4 soldiers, he led the assault on the Zerothian-held world. The landing was swift, and the firefights that followed were fierce. His team fought through the streets, clearing enemy forces, moving swiftly through the rubble. They finally reached the city's outskirts, where the diplomats were being held. But something unexpected happened as Ethan and his team made their way through a thick forest on the edge of the city. They found something they weren't prepared for. It wasn't an enemy soldier or another firefight. Instead, it was a woman figure dressed in tattered clothes, lying motionless on the forest floor. At first, they thought she was one of the Zerothian soldiers, but when Ethan got closer, his heart skipped a beat. It was Queen Eris. Her once-proud armor was tarnished, her face bruised, and her hands trembled slightly. Blood stained the earth beneath her, and there was a visible wound on her side, where a weapon had clearly pierced her. Ethan instinctively stepped forward, his weapon lowered. His soldiers hesitated behind him, unsure of what to do. He was the leader. The decision was his. "Captain, we can't trust her," one of his soldiers whispered. "She's the enemy." Ethan ignored him, kneeling beside the queen. His years of military training had taught him to assess situations quickly, and right now, this was not a time for hesitation. Despite her reputation as a ruthless ruler, there was something different about her, something in the way she lay there, vulnerable, that made him hesitate. She looked up at him with those piercing alien eyes, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of something unexpected: fear. Eris, the warrior queen who had led her people with an iron fist, was afraid. You're human," she gasped, her voice strained and weak. Ethan nodded. "I'm here to help." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Wasn't a decision he'd thought through. It was a gut reaction. He'd been trained to fight against enemies, not to show kindness to them. But something in her eyes, in the way she looked at him, made him feel as though there was more to this woman than the stories of cruelty that had surrounded her. She was a queen, a leader of warriors. She had crushed many before him, yet here, she was hurt, vulnerable, and asking for help. It was the first time Ethan had seen a ruler in such a position, and it struck him hard. "You'll kill me, won't you?" she whispered, a quiet desperation in her voice. Ethan shook his head, his instincts taking over. He glanced at his team, who were still standing behind him, uncertain. "We're not here to kill. We're here to help." Eris let out a weak laugh, her breath catching in her throat. "Help me. Don't deserve it." "Everyone deserves help," Ethan said softly, gently lifting her into his arms. The others looked on in shock, but none of them dared question the captain. He had always been decisive, and when he made a decision, his team followed without question. Ethan carried her back too. Their ship, the Zerothian Queen, now nothing more than a fragile, injured woman in his arms. His mind raced. What was happening here? Why was he helping her? He'd been trained to fight her, not to show mercy. Yet, as he looked down at her, he couldn't bring himself to see her as the monster the galaxy had painted her to be. Back aboard the ship, Ethan carefully laid her on a medical bed, his hands working quickly to clean her wounds and stop the bleeding. His heart beat faster as he worked. He had treated many injuries, but none had felt so personal as he patched her up. He found himself talking to her more out of habit than anything else. "What's your name?" he asked as he applied a bandage to her side. "Reese," she replied. Weakly, Queen Eris. Ethan hesitated, then looked up at her. "Queen, huh? You're not what I expected?" She gave him a tired, bitter smile. "What did you expect, a monster?" "Honestly," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "But you don't seem like a monster." For a moment, they just stared at each other. There was no hostility in her gaze, no defiance, just vulnerability. It was strange seeing her like this. She had always been a symbol of fear, but here she was, human, fragile, and needing help. Eris closed her eyes, letting out a shaky breath. "I don't deserve your help." "You don't need to deserve it," Ethan said, sitting beside her. "Everyone deserves kindness, even a queen." Her eyes opened slowly, and for the first time, there was no anger in them, only something softer, something Ethan couldn't quite put into words. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. Ethan paused. He didn't have an answer. All he knew was that something in him, something deep inside, wouldn't allow him to leave her behind. Maybe it was the kindness his mother had taught him. Maybe it was the humanity that had always defined him. But whatever it was, he couldn't abandon her now. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper, as Eris drifted into unconsciousness. Ethan stood by her side, watching over her. Had come here to fight, to win, and to save the diplomats. But now, he found himself torn between duty and something else as strange. Growing connection to the woman who had once been his enemy. For the first time in his career, Ethan Moore felt uncertainty. What had started as a simple mission had already become something much more complicated. And as the night wore on, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed. The days passed quickly as Ethan and his team made camp on the outskirts of the city. The soldiers worked diligently to secure their position, but Ethan couldn't shake the image of Queen Eris lying helplessly in his arms. She was still unconscious, her condition slowly improving under the care of the ship's medical equipment. He had spent hours tending to her, almost forgetting the mission that had brought him here in the first place. The Queen, the enemy of humanity, had become something he didn't expect, a patient, a wounded soul in need of protection. As the sun rose the following morning, Ethan found himself standing beside her bed, watching over her while she slept. Her once proud face, marred by bruises and cuts, seemed almost peaceful now. There were no signs of the fierce ruler he had been told about. There were no signs of the woman who commanded armies with cold precision. For the first time, Ethan saw her as a person. The ship's medics had done what they could, but she wasn't fully healed. Her breathing was still shallow and her body was still weak. Ethan couldn't leave her side even though his mind kept reminding him that he was here to finish a mission, not play nurse to the enemy. When Eris finally woke, her eyes fluttered open, the dim lights of the ship reflecting off her dark skin. She blinked in confusion for a moment, her mind still foggy from the pain and the sedation. Slowly her gaze locked with Ethan's, and for a moment there was silence. No words, just an exchange of glances that spoke volumes. "How long have I been asleep?" she asked softly, her voice still raspy from the injury. 2 days, Ethan replied, his voice gentle. "You're lucky to be alive." She nodded slowly, but there was no gratitude in her eyes. Only the cold detachment of someone who had learned to never show weakness. "I don't need your pity," she said, her tone harder than it had been before. Ethan took a step closer to the bed, his gaze never leaving her face. "It's not pity. You're human, just like me. You might be a queen, but you're still just a person. I'm just helping." Queen Eris stared at him for a long time, as if searching for something hidden behind his words. She wasn't used to this someone being kind to her without expecting something in return. Her world had always been one of power, control, and fear. She had learned long ago that kindness was a weakness. But in Ethan's eyes, she saw something different. It was not weakness he showed, but compassion. "You don't understand," she said after a moment. "I'm a queen. I lead my people in war. I've made decisions that have caused the deaths of many. I've sacrificed everything for my people, and now I'm—" She stopped herself, her voice faltering for the first time. Ethan sat down beside her, his eyes filled with understanding. "We all have our burdens, Eris. You're not the only one who's had to make tough choices. I've lost friends in this war, too. That doesn't mean you're beyond help, or that you don't deserve kindness." Eris turned her head away from him, staring out of the window of the ship, her mind racing. She had never been shown kindness by an enemy before. It unsettled her. But as the days went on, Ethan's presence began to feel familiar, like a strange comfort. She had never expected to feel this way. Vulnerable, human. She was the queen, the leader of her people. She wasn't supposed to feel this. She wasn't supposed to need anyone. But something about Ethan's words, the warmth in his eyes, made her question everything she had ever believed. The following days were filled with quiet moments between them. Ethan would sit by her side, talking to her about his life, his family, the world he had come from. He spoke of the struggles of humanity, the battles they had fought, and the sacrifices they had made. Eris listened, not out of obligation, but because something in his words resonated with her. She found herself telling him about her life, too. The pain of watching her people suffer, the guilt of making decisions that had cost lives, and the loneliness of leadership. She began to leak through the walls she had built around herself. She didn't want to admit it, but she was starting to trust him. In one of their quiet conversations, Ethan asked, "Why did you fight this war, Eris? What is it all for?" She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the blanket. "It's for my people," she said, her voice steady. "I had to protect them. They looked to me for strength, for guidance. I could never show weakness. Not as their queen." Ethan nodded, understanding the weight she carried. It's not weakness to care about others. You don't have to carry the burden alone. She met his gaze then, something soft flickering in her eyes. "I don't know how to stop carrying it," she whispered. The days stretched into weeks, and though Ethan's mission was far from over, he couldn't bring himself to leave. There was something about Eris, now something beyond. The title she carried, beyond the enemy he was supposed to fight. He had grown to care for her. Her strength, her courage, even her vulnerability, they all drew him closer. But there was still one thing he couldn't shake. He was a human soldier, and she was the queen of his enemies.
Ow.
Their people were locked in a deadly war, one that had torn entire systems apart. He couldn't just forget that. One evening, as the stars outside the ship shone bright, Eris turned to Ethan, her voice almost a whisper. "Why do you care, Ethan? Help me when you know what I've done." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "Because, in the end, we're all human. We're all fighting for something. And maybe, just maybe, there's more to life than just war." Her eyes softened at his words. I'd never heard anyone speak like that before. Perhaps there was something to his words, something she had never considered in all her years of fighting. Maybe there was a chance for something more. But the question remained. Was she ready to let go of everything she had known? Was she ready to trust this human soldier whose kindness had melted the walls around her heart? The war was still out there. But in the silence of the ship, with only the hum of the engines and the soft glow of the stars above, Reese found herself asking the one question she never thought she would. Could she have a life beyond this war? Out. The weight of her crown pressing down on her every day, and as she glanced at Ethan sitting beside her with that quiet, unwavering support, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was hope. But for the first time, it wasn't her army that would decide her fate. It was the man sitting by her side. As the days continued to pass, the quiet bond between Ethan and Eris grew deeper. Despite the strange situation they found themselves in, they had come to understand each other better. The queen, once feared for her coldness, now seemed like a woman trapped by her own responsibilities. And Ethan, the soldier who had once seen her as nothing more than a powerful enemy, had become her closest ally in this uncertain time. They spent hours together, talking and learning about each other's lives. Eris would listen as Ethan spoke of his experiences in the human military, told her about his family, the small town he had grown up in, and how he had enlisted to protect his people. His words were filled with the same quiet strength that she had admired in him from the beginning, yet despite their growing connection, Reese was constantly haunted by the weight of her crown. The war that raged on in the galaxy wasn't over. It was never over for someone like her. She had spent her entire life leading her people in battles that seemed endless. It was a war she had fought to the bitter end, unwilling to surrender or let go of her duty. And now, in the midst of all this, there was a human soldier beside her, offering nothing but help. One evening, after another conversation about their respective worlds, Reese sat quietly by the window of the ship, staring out at the distant stars. Ethan joined her silently, sitting beside her and watching the same stars that had once seemed so far away. "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it?" she asked softly, her voice almost lost in the hum of the ship. "Worth it?" Ethan repeated, his gaze shifting from the stars to her face. "What do you mean?" "The war," she said, her eyes distant. "The endless fighting, all the lives lost. My people are dying, and for what? I've led them into battle, time and time again. I've fought and killed, thinking it was for their survival. But now, ... now I'm not so sure." Ethan's eyes softened, and he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I think we all question ourselves in times like this. War makes you do things you wouldn't normally do. But in the end, it's about survival. And maybe, just maybe, it's also about what we choose to fight for." Eris looked at him, her expression unreadable. "And what do you fight for, Ethan?" He paused, considering her question carefully. "I fight for people, my family, my friends, the ones I've lost, and the ones I'm still trying to protect." A long silence followed, and in that silence, Reese realized something that she had never allowed herself to consider before. She was tired. Tired of the endless struggle. Tired of the bloodshed. But more than that, she was tired of carrying the burden alone. "You've been a leader for so long, Reese," Ethan continued, breaking the silence. "You've had to make impossible decisions, but you don't have to carry all of it by yourself." For the first time in what felt like forever, Eris felt a tear slip down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, but Ethan saw it. He said nothing, but his hand, still on her shoulder, gave a gentle squeeze. It was enough. It was more than enough. Later, that evening, after the stars had faded into the soft light of dawn, Ethan was summoned by his superior officer. He didn't want to go, didn't want to leave Aris, especially not now when he felt the deepest connection to her. But duty called, and as a soldier, he had no choice. As he made his way to the communications room, he couldn't shake the thought of her. There was something about Aris, something more than just the queen of an enemy planet. She had a strength, a power within her that Ethan could see beneath the tough exterior she wore so carefully. She wasn't just a ruler, she was a person. And the more he spent time with her, the more he realized that maybe, just maybe, they were not so different after all. When he entered the communications room, he found himself facing his commanding officer, General Larkin. "Captain Moore," the general began, "we've received new intel. The Zarathians are preparing for an allowed assault on one of our outposts. It's critical that we move fast if we want to prevent a complete collapse of our defense." Ethan nodded, his mind already shifting back into soldier mode. "Understood." "Sir?" The general paused, studying him closely. "You've been spending a lot of time with the Queen, Moore. Any intel you can provide?" Ethan hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. He knew that he couldn't betray the trust Eris had placed in him, but the general's eyes were sharp, searching for something more than just battlefield updates. "She's a fighter, sir," Ethan said slowly. "She's not the monster everyone says she is. She's just a woman caught in a war she never wanted." Larkin raised an eyebrow. "Queen caught in a war she never wanted? Sounds like a convenient excuse to me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm telling you the truth. She's not our enemy the way we think she is." The general didn't seem convinced. "I'll believe it when I see it. Just remember, Moore, your loyalty is to humanity, not to the enemy." Ethan nodded, though his heart felt heavy. He knew his duty, but part of him couldn't shake the feeling that Eris wasn't the enemy they had all been led to believe. He wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but he couldn't deny what had started between them. His connection to Eris had become something deeper than mere pity or curiosity. Later that day, as the sun began to set, Ethan returned to the ship's medical bay, where Eris was resting. She was still weak, but her strength was returning little by little. When he entered, she looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Are you ready to leave?" she asked, her voice steady, but tinged with something else, an edge of sadness. Ethan sat down beside her, his gaze never leaving her face. "We've got a mission. I'll be leaving soon." Reese nodded, though she said nothing. There was a silence between them, one that spoke of more than just words. She had known this moment would come. She knew that Ethan's duty was to his people, just as hers was to hers. But for the first time, she felt a pang of something unfamiliar, something like regret. "I wish things were different," she said. Softly, her voice barely above a whisper, Ethan reached out and touched her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "I do too. But right now, we have a mission to finish." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, it was as if the entire galaxy had faded away, leaving only the two of them. "You're not like the others," she said quietly. Ethan smiled gently. "Neither. Are you?" For a brief moment, Eris allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to end the war. But the reality was harsh. The war still raged on, and both of them had responsibilities they could not ignore. Yet, as they shared this quiet moment together, they both understood that something had changed between them. They were no longer enemies, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The day had arrived, and the galaxy's turmoil had not slowed. As the news of the Zorathian forces preparing for an all-out assault on one of the human outposts spread, Ethan knew that his time with Eris was quickly running out. Duty always called louder than personal matters, and his role as a soldier came first. Still, even as the ship's engines hummed with preparations for the mission, he couldn't help but think of Hertha Queen, who had shown him a side of herself no one had ever witnessed. Ethan spent most of the morning going over tactical strategies, trying to keep his mind focused on the mission. No matter how hard he tried, he kept finding himself glancing toward the medical bay, where Eris was resting. Her injuries had healed enough for her to sit up, though her strength was still not what it once was. Every time he saw her, he was reminded of the delicate line they were walking between being enemies and something else entirely. It was later that afternoon when she called for him. She had been quiet for the last few hours, her mind seemingly lost in thought. When Ethan entered the medical bay, he found her sitting up on her bed, her posture straight but her gaze distant. It was as if she had been waiting for something, a moment she knew was inevitable. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm yet filled with emotion. "I've been thinking about everything, about what you've said, and about my people. I realize that my actions, the choices I've made, have not just affected my enemies. They've affected you too. I owe you more than just gratitude." Ethan approached her slowly, unsure of what she was about to say. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, a tension that neither had been able to break. But something about her tone, something in her eyes, told him that this conversation would change everything. "You've shown me a side of yourself that I never expected," she continued, her voice softer now. "You've shown me kindness when I least deserved it, and for that I want to give you something that will prove I don't just see you as an enemy anymore." Ethan's brow furrowed. "You don't have to give me anything, Eris. You've already shown me more than enough by simply trusting me." Eris shook her head, her eyes never leaving his. "No, I want to give you something meaningful, something that will show you that I see you not as a soldier, not as the enemy, but as a person." Ethan stood still, trying to understand what she meant. But before he could respond, Eris reached out with her hand, pulling something small and glowing from beneath her blankets. It was a crystalline, smooth, clear stone that shimmered with an inner light. It wasn't large, but its energy was undeniable. "This is the gift of the Zorothian people," she said, holding the crystal out to him. "It's a symbol of power and connection. We use it in our culture as a way to bond with others, especially with those who have earned our trust. This is a rare artifact, one that's usually reserved for our closest allies, but I want you to have it." Ethan hesitated, unsure what to make of the gesture. He had been raised to view everything Zerasian with suspicion, yet here was Eris, the queen of his enemies, offering him a piece of her world. "I don't understand," he said slowly, taking a cautious step forward. "What does it do?" Eris looked up at him, her gaze softening. "It allows us to connect with the one we give it to. It can reveal things, thoughts, emotions, memories. It bonds us together. And when you accept it, it shows that you accept the other person fully, flaws and all." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "You're asking me to bond with you?" Eris nodded. "Yes. In this way, I'm asking you to know me as I have come to know you. It's the good, the bad, and everything in between." Ethan stared at the crystalline, her hand, his mind racing. He had already seen so much of Eris, the queen who ruled with an iron fist, the fierce woman who had shown him compassion. And now, this fragile woman who was offering him a piece of herself, trusting him in a way. She had never trusted anyone before. "This is a big step," he said, his voice low. "I don't want to make you do something you're not ready for." Eris shook her head, her eyes steady. "I've already made my decision. You've shown me a kindness that I never thought possible. This is my way of returning it." Slowly, Ethan took the crystal from her, feeling its weight in his palm. It pulsed with a warmth that seemed to match the rhythm of his own heartbeat. As he held it, he felt an undeniable connection, something powerful, something that transcended the space between them. "This doesn't change anything," Ethan said quietly, though the crystal in his hand already told him otherwise. "We still have our duties. I'm still a soldier, and you're still a queen. The war is still going on. But I accept this. I accept you." Ara smiled faintly, a mixture of sadness and gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Ethan. Thank you for understanding." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan could feel the weight of the crystal in his hand, the emotion swirling between them. It was a strange feeling, like they were no longer two separate people. Instead, they were connected by something deeper, something that neither of them could quite explain. But that was undeniably real. Before he could say anything else, the communication system aboard the ship crackled to life, interrupting their moment. Ethan stiffened, his military instincts kicking in. The mission had been called forward. Human forces were preparing for the assault. It was time for him to report in. He looked down at the crystal one last time before turning to face Eris. "I have to go. Duty calls. But I'll be back. I promise." Eris nodded, her expression unreadable. But there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that gave Ethan hope. Perhaps this was the beginning of something new, something that could change the fate of both their worlds. As he left the room, the crystal in his hand seemed to burn even brighter, its light flickering in the darkness. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if this bond would be enough to bridge the gap between humanity and the Zorathians, or if the war would swallow them both whole. But for the first time in a long time, Ethan allowed himself to believe that there was hope. Hope for peace, hope for understanding, and most of all, hope for a future where they weren't just enemies, but something more. The crystal Aris had given him still rested in Ethan's hand, its warmth a constant reminder of the strange connection that was growing between them. The war, which had once been his only focus, seemed distant now, overshadowed by the bond he felt with the woman who had once been his enemy. But as much as he wanted to ignore the impending conflict, reality had a way of forcing its way in. As the mission neared, preparations were in full swing. Ethan was surrounded by his team, working on the strategy to repel the Zorathian forces that were threatening a critical human outpost. His mind, however, wasn't fully with them. His thoughts kept drifting back to Eris. What had she meant by her gift? What did it reveal? He had been hesitant to touch the crystal after she had handed it to him. But the weight of the decision to accept it was already on him. That night, after hours of planning, Ethan found himself alone in his quarters. He pulled the crystal from his pocket, feeling the familiar warmth as it rested in his palm. The soft glow it emitted filled the room with a faint, almost ethereal light. Slowly, he closed his eyes and pressed it gently against his chest. He could feel the pulse of its energy, and within seconds, it was as if the walls between him and Eris vanished. It was a strange sensation. He could hear her voice clearly in his mind, not spoken aloud, but deep within his thoughts. "Ethan." Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "I've given you something more than just an artifact. The crystal allows us to connect, to truly know each other, not just the surface. It shows everything. My memories, my thoughts, my fears, and my heart." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had heard about this kind of connection before, but never in such a personal, powerful way. He had no idea what to expect, but now he was about to experience it. The truth. The first image that appeared in his mind was a memory of Eris as a child, standing in front of a large, bustling city. She was small, her face filled with wonder, her eyes wide as she looked out at the world. Her mother, a tall, regal figure, stood beside her, giving instructions to soldiers in the distance. The memory shifted, and Ethan saw Eris older now, standing at the front of a battlefield, a determined look on her face. She was no longer the innocent child, but a powerful queen leading her people. He could feel her fear, her strength, and the weight of her decisions. She had never been given the choice to simply live. Every moment of her life had been consumed by duty. He saw flashes of battles she had fought in, the faces of soldiers she had commanded, and the bodies of those who had fallen under her orders. The screams, the chaos, the violence had all flooded his mind. But with each memory, there was something else. A loneliness. A deep, aching loneliness that Eris had carried with her all these years. "I had to be strong," her voice echoed in his mind. "For my people, for my kingdom. I couldn't show weakness. I couldn't afford to let anyone see the cracks in my armor." Ethan's heart clenched as he watched her memories unfold. He had only seen her as the queen, the ruthless leader. But now, he saw her as something else. A woman who had been forced to become a symbol of power. Someone who had never had the chance to choose her own path. The memories kept coming, each one more painful than the last. Ethan saw Eris in moments of vulnerability, when she had to make impossible decisions. When she had lost loved ones, when she had been betrayed by those she trusted. He saw the weight she carried, and he felt it too. The immense pressure of leading a people who looked to her for everything. The isolation of being alone at the top, and then, through the flood of memories, came a single moment. A brief, quiet memory of Eris standing alone under the night sky, her hands trembling as she looked up at the stars. "I wonder," her voice whispered in his mind, "what it would be like to live a life without this burden. A life where I could just be." The connection snapped, and Ethan was left breathless. The flood of images and emotions left him stunned, his mind reeling from what he had just experienced. I had seen the true Eris, the woman behind the crown, the queen who had been forced to put her own desires aside for the good of her people. And he understood now. She was not the cold-hearted leader he had been told about. She was just like him, just like everyone else, fighting for something, fighting for survival. He sat on the edge of his bed, the crystal still warm in his hand. His chest tightened as he processed everything. He had known Eris was more than just a ruler, but this was something different. This was the truth. But as much as he had learned, there was still so much he didn't know. The war, the politics, the endless battle between their peoples, it still loomed over them. Ethan was a soldier. He had made promises to his superiors, to his team. He couldn't forget his duty, but Eris. She had given him something that no one else had. She had opened up her heart, showing him the pain, the struggle, and the strength that no one else had ever seen. And in return, he had to ask himself, what could he give her? What was his role in all of this? As the weight of his thoughts grew heavier, the ship's intercom suddenly buzzed, snapping him from his reverie. "Captain Moore," the voice of General Larkin came through. "It's time. The mission starts now." Ethan stood up, the crystal still in his hand. The decision had been made. The war was not over. He couldn't ignore his duty, no matter how deeply he felt for Eris. But one thing was certain: everything had changed. The way he saw her, the way he saw himself, everything was different now. He couldn't undo what had been done, couldn't erase the connection they had formed. And as he left his quarters, heading for the ship's command center, he couldn't shake the feeling that the war was no longer just about enemies and allies. It was about something much bigger. It was about understanding. It was about hope. And as the door to the command center slid open, he took one last look at the crystal, now resting in his pocket, and promised himself that whatever came next, he would face it with the truth he had discovered. The air in the command center was tense, thick with the weight of impending battle. The fleet was ready, and every soldier stood at attention, their eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the coordinates of the Zorthian forces. The mission was clear: defend the human outpost at all costs. But for Ethan, the mission had become something far more personal. He glanced at the map, then at the faces of his team, but his mind wasn't fully on the battle. It had shifted, redirected toward the Queen, Eris, and the connection they had formed. The events of the past few days felt like a dream, like some strange twist of fate that had pulled them together. What had started as a simple rescue mission had spiraled into something far more complicated. "Captain Moore." General Larkin's voice broke through his thoughts. "You need to focus. This mission is critical. We can't afford distractions." Ethan nodded, forcing himself to shake off his thoughts of Eris. He had to focus on the task at hand. There was no room for personal feelings in a battle. The fleet was ready, the enemy was closing in, and the outpost had to be defended. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "We'll move out immediately." As the orders were given and the human forces began to mobilize, Ethan couldn't help but feel a pull in his chest, a deep ache that refused to go away. He had been so focused on the mission that he hadn't even allowed himself the time to truly process everything that had happened between him and Eris. Their connection, the bond they had formed, had changed him in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. But there was something else, something more pressing, that demanded his attention now. As the ships prepared for launch, Ethan stood near the docking bay, his thoughts still drifting to the Queen. He could almost feel her presence, as though she were right there beside him. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, recalling the way she had looked at him just days before, the vulnerability she had shown when she handed him the crystal. She had given him everything, her memories, her heart, and he knew, deep down, that she had entrusted him with more than just her trust. But the war was still raging. The human forces were still at war with the Zorthians. There was no time for hesitation, no time for wondering what might be. "Captain," voice broke his concentration, and he turned to see his first officer, Lieutenant Reynolds, standing before him. "The fleet is ready. We're waiting on your signal." Ethan nodded, snapping back into soldier mode. "Understood, Lieutenant. Let's move out." He turned and strode toward the command ship, his team following behind. The time for questioning everything was over. The battle was here, and the fate of the outpost and the lives of countless soldiers were on his shoulders. But in the back of his mind, a small part of him couldn't let go of the memory of Eris, the Queen who had melted his heart with her unexpected kindness, as the fleet made its way into the heart of enemy territory. Ethan's mind kept returning to her. She was still out there, still leading her people, still fighting for survival. But what had started as a war between enemies had slowly transformed into something else. Could they ever truly be allies? Could the war end without more bloodshed? Or had the galaxy already gone too far down a path that led to destruction? The battle was brutal. The Zorathian forces had arrived with full force, and the outpost was in danger of falling. Ethan's team fought valiantly, their ships maneuvering through the chaos, firing their weapons and engaging the enemy. It was a battle like any other, but this time it felt different. As the sound of explosions filled the air, Ethan's thoughts were still with Eris. She had given him a glimpse into her soul, a glimpse into the woman behind the crown, and it was a gift he couldn't ignore. But as much as he wished for peace, he knew that the reality of the situation was far more complicated. He could not simply stand by and watch as his people were destroyed. He had a duty, and that duty was to protect humanity at all costs. Despite the chaos of the battle, the humans fought with everything they had. Zorothians, though formidable, were being pushed back. The tide of the battle seemed to be turning in humanity's favor. But as the dust began to settle and the enemy forces retreated, Ethan felt a deep sense of unease. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. In the midst of the victory celebrations that followed, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The battle had been won, but the conflict that raged inside him had not. He had given his all to the mission, but he had also given his heart to someone he had once seen as an enemy. Eris was no longer just the queen of the Zorothians. She was someone he cared for deeply, someone who had trusted him with everything she had. He couldn't forget her, not now, not after everything they had shared. But what was he supposed to do? The war was still ongoing, and the connection they shared could not change that, or could it? As the humans celebrated their victory, Ethan slipped away to his quarters, his mind still racing. He pulled the crystal from his pocket, holding it in his hand as he sat on the edge of his bed. The crystal glowed softly, its warmth still comforting against his skin. He closed his eyes, holding the crystal close to his chest, and let his thoughts drift to Eris. Ethan, her voice whispered in his mind once again, as if she could feel his presence. I don't know what this means, what we are, but I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop wondering if there's a future for us beyond this war. The words struck Ethan like a bolt of lightning. She had said it, the thing that had been hanging between them. Could there really be a future? Could they truly find peace, not just between their peoples, but within themselves? He opened his eyes, the weight of the crystal in his hand grounding him. The galaxy was still at war. But in that moment, Ethan made a decision. He wouldn't run from this connection anymore. He wouldn't pretend that it didn't matter. He didn't know what the future held. But for the first time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, the future could be different.